I had always dreamed of my wedding day since I was a little girl, imagining the moment I would walk down the aisle in a dress that shimmered like moonlight. Growing up in Boston with parents who had been happily married for 30 years gave me this idyllic vision of what marriage should be. My name is Emma Johnson, and this is the story of how my perfect day crumbled before my eyes. It was June 15th, a Saturday that promised clear skies and gentle breezes. The venue, Hawthorne Manor, sat nestled among sprawling gardens just outside the city. My bridesmaids, Sarah, Kate, and my sister Olivia, had arrived at dawn, arms full of coffee cups and makeup bags. The bridal suite buzzed with excited chatter and the occasional burst of laughter. "You look absolutely stunning," Olivia whispered as she helped adjust my veil. I caught my reflection in the antique mirror, blonde hair swept into an elegant updo, the delicate lace of my dress catching the morning light. For a moment, I believed everything would be as perfect as I had planned. Then came the knock at the door. "It's Eleanor," said Kate, a note of caution in her voice. Eleanor Shaw, my future mother-in-law, had been a constant source of tension since Michael and I had announced our engagement 18 months ago. She entered the room like a winter breeze, elegant in her pale blue dress, but carrying that familiar chill. "I brought you something," she said, her voice honey-sweet, but her eyes evaluating every detail of my appearance. She handed me a small box containing a pearl bracelet. "It's been in the Shaw family for generations. I wore it at my wedding." The gesture seemed kind, but there was something in her tone. Something that said this was less a gift and more a reminder that I was entering her domain. "Thank you, Eleanor," I said, sliding it onto my wrist despite the weight it seemed to carry beyond just pearls. Throughout the morning preparations, I caught her watching me, lips pressed into a thin line whenever Michael's name came up. When my father arrived to escort me, I saw how she whispered something to him that made him look at me with momentary confusion. "Don't let her get to you," Sarah murmured while fixing my lipstick. "This is your day, not hers." I nodded, pushing down the unease that had been building since Eleanor's arrival. I'd spent 2 years navigating her subtle criticisms and backhanded compliments. Michael always insisted she was just protective, that she'd warm up to me eventually. I wanted to believe him. After all, he was everything I'd ever wanted. Kind, intelligent, with a laugh that made everyone around him smile. We'd met at a charity fundraiser where he'd bid an outrageous amount on a picnic basket I'd prepared just to have lunch with me. Our relationship had been a whirlwind of weekend trips to Cape Cod, cozy nights watching old movies, and plans for a future that seemed within reach. The ceremony was set for 2 o'clock. As the clock ticked closer, my father took my arm, his steady presence calming my nerves. "You ready, Pumpkin?" he asked, using the nickname he'd given me when I was 5. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. The music began, Canon in D, played by a string quartet. The double doors opened to reveal rows of friends and family, flowers adorning every surface, and at the end of the aisle, Michael, handsome, in his black tuxedo. His face lit up when he saw me, and for that moment, everything felt right again. Each step down the aisle felt like floating. I passed familiar faces, my college roommate Lisa, my cousins from Chicago, Michael's colleagues from the law firm. Then I saw Eleanor, seated in the front row, her expression unreadable behind a practiced smile. The ceremony itself was everything I'd hoped for. The officiant, Dr. Thompson from my childhood church, spoke about love and partnership. Michael and I exchanged vows we'd written ourselves. His voice cracked with emotion as he promised to stand by me through every storm. I believed him with every fiber of my being. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Dr. Thompson announced, and the crowd erupted in applause as Michael kissed me. We turned to face our guests, hands clasped tightly together, and began the walk, back down the aisle as husband and wife. The transition to the reception felt like entering another world. Waiters circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres while the band played softly in the background. Michael and I moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and posing for photos. I kept searching his face for signs of the joy I felt. And though he smiled, something seemed off. A tension around his eyes that hadn't been there during the ceremony. "Everything okay?" I asked as we prepared to enter the grand ballroom for our official introduction. "Of course," he replied, but his eyes drifted to where his mother stood, elegant and poised, watching us. Just taking it all in. The ballroom had been transformed into a fairy tale setting, with twinkling lights cascading from the ceiling and centerpieces of white roses and baby's breath on each table. A spotlight illuminated the dance floor, where we would soon have our first dance. "Ladies and gentlemen," the DJ announced, "please welcome for the first time Mr. and Mrs. Michael Shaw." We entered to thunderous applause, Michael's hand at the small of my back guiding me forward. In that moment, I allowed myself to believe that the strange feeling of dread that had followed me throughout the day was just wedding nerves. That the life ahead of us would be as beautiful as this moment. I didn't know it then, but I was walking into the eye of a storm that had been brewing long before I'd said, "I do." Our entrance to the reception hall was met with thunderous applause. The fairy lights cast a warm glow over the faces of our loved ones as Michael led me toward the center of the room where we would share our first dance. The band began to play "At Last" by Etta James, a song that had become ours after our third date, when Michael had pulled me into an impromptu dance in the rain outside a jazz club in downtown Boston. As we took our position, I glanced at the head table where Eleanor sat, back straight, barely touching her champagne. She caught my eye and raised her glass in a gesture that felt more like a warning than a toast. I pushed the thought away and focused on Michael, on the feel of his hand in mine, on the moment we had waited so long for. "I love you," I whispered as we began to sway to the music. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You look beautiful," he said mechanically. The dance felt different than I had imagined, stiffer, more performative. When it ended, the guests clapped politely, and I was swept into a dance with my father, while Michael paired with Eleanor. I watched over my dad's shoulder as she leaned close to her son's ear, her lips barely moving. "Your mother seems to be in rare form today," my dad commented, following my gaze. "She's always like that," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "I'm hoping she'll warm up eventually." Dad squeezed my hand. "Just remember who you're married to, Emma, not her." If only it had been that simple. After the father-daughter dance came dinner, a carefully selected menu of filet mignon and base. I barely tasted my food, too busy making sure everyone was having a good time, too aware of the distance that seemed to be growing between Michael and me with each passing hour. "Time for speeches," announced Ryan, Michael's best man and law school roommate. He launched into stories of their college days, of Michael's dedication to his studies and his clients, painting the picture of a man I recognized and loved. When he finished, he raised his glass. "To Michael and Emma, may your lives together be filled with the same joy you've brought to all of us." Then it was Olivia's turn. My sister spoke of our childhood, of how I had always been the planner, the dreamer, the one who believed in happy endings. "And now you've found yours," she said, tears glistening in her eyes. "Michael, you better take good care of her, or you'll have me to answer to." The room filled with laughter, but I noticed Eleanor whispering again to Michael, who had returned to sit beside me after the main course. Whatever she said made him stiffen, his hand tightening around his champagne flute. "What's wrong?" I asked quietly as the servers cleared the plates for the cake cutting. "Nothing," he said, but there was an edge to his voice I'd never heard before. "Just something my mother mentioned." "About what?" Not now, Emma. The cake cutting was announced, and we moved to the table where our 5-tier white chocolate and raspberry creation waited. We posed for photos, hands joined over the knife. Just as we pressed down to cut the first slice, Eleanor appeared at Michael's side. "Remember what I told you," she murmured. "Look at her face when you confront her. You'll see the truth." Before I could ask what she meant, we were feeding each other cake, smiling for the cameras, playing our parts. But the air had changed, charged with something dangerous I couldn't identify. As the evening progressed, Eleanor circled us like a shark, always within earshot, always watching. I tried to enjoy myself, dancing with college friends, laughing, with cousins I rarely saw. But Michael grew more distant by the hour. He kept disappearing, only to return with a deeper scowl, his eyes darting between Eleanor and me. Around 9 o'clock, after a group dance to Uptown Funk that had everyone on their feet, I found Michael at the bar, downing what looked like whiskey. Eleanor stood beside him, her hand on his arm, her face a mask of concern. "Michael, can we talk?" I asked, suddenly desperate to break whatever spell she had cast. "Alone?" He looked at me as if seeing me for the first time that day, his eyes clouded with something between confusion and anger. "Yes, I think we need to." Eleanor smiled thinly. "I'll leave you two alone," she said, but as she passed me, she added just loud enough for me to hear, "He knows, dear, about all of it." My stomach dropped. "Knows what?" I called after her, but she was already gliding away, satisfaction evident in the set of her shoulders. Michael gripped my arm and led me to a small antechamber off the main ballroom, closing the door behind us. The music became muffled, and the sudden quiet felt ominous. "What's going on?" I asked, fear creeping into my voice. "You've been acting strange all night." "My mother showed me the emails," he said flatly. "What emails?" "Between you and David. She found them last week when she was helping you set up your new laptop." David was my ex-boyfriend from college, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, except for a brief exchange of congratulatory messages when he announced his engagement 6 months ago. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said honestly. "Don't lie to me." Michael's voice rose sharply. "She showed me everything. How you've been planning to leave me after the wedding once you get access to my accounts. How you and David laughed about me behind my back. How this whole thing was a setup. The accusations were so absurd, so completely detached from reality, that for a moment I couldn't speak. Michael, that's insane. I haven't been in touch with David beyond a couple of public comments on social media. Your mother is lying." "She wouldn't do that," he said, but doubt flickered across his face. "Think about it," I urged. "Why would I marry you only to leave? We signed a prenup. Your mother insisted on it. What could I possibly gain?" For a second, I thought reason was breaking through. Then the door opened, and Eleanor appeared, her timing too perfect to be coincidental. She must have been listening. "The cake is being served and people are asking for you both," she said smoothly. Then to Michael, "Remember what I warned you about. She'll try to turn this around on me." Michael's face hardened. Again, we returned to the reception, the facade of happiness growing thinner by the minute. As we entered, the DJ announced it was time for the bouquet toss. Mechanically, I went through the motions, turning my back to the crowd of single women and throwing my carefully crafted bouquet of white roses and lilies. It was caught by Kate, who squealed with delight. Then came the garter removal, a tradition I had been hesitant about, but had agreed to for Michael's sake. I sat on a chair in the center of the dance floor, heart pounding as Michael knelt before me. Our eyes met, and in that moment I saw no trace of the man I had fallen in love with. In his place was a stranger, his gaze cold and accusatory. As he reached for the garter, Eleanor sidled up beside him, bent down, and whispered something in his ear. Whatever she said was the final push he needed. Michael stood abruptly, looked down at me with undisguised contempt, and before I could react, he raised his hand and slapped me hard across the face. The sound cracked through the room like lightning. Music stopped. Conversations halted mid-sentence. The sting of the blow was nothing compared to the shock of betrayal that coursed through me. As I raised my hand to my burning cheek, I saw Eleanor's face behind Michael's shoulder, a smile of cruel triumph playing at her lips. The dream had become a nightmare, and I was wide awake. The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. My cheek throbbed, but the pain in my heart was far worse. I stared up at Michael from where I'd half fallen onto the chair, unable to comprehend how we'd arrived at this moment. Around us, 200 guests sat frozen in shock, their faces a blur of horror and disbelief. My sister Olivia was the first to move, rushing toward me with a look of fury I'd never seen on her gentle face. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she shouted at Michael, positioning herself between us like a shield. Michael stood rigid, his hand still raised as if he himself couldn't believe what he'd done. Behind him, Eleanor's triumphant smile had vanished, replaced by a look of practiced concern that didn't reach her eyes. She placed a hand on her son's arm, as if to comfort him. The victim in this scenario she had orchestrated. "Michael, sweetheart," she said loudly enough for those nearby to hear. "You've had too much to drink. Let's step outside." The band leader cleared his throat awkwardly into the microphone. "Let's take a short break, folks," he announced, and the musicians began setting down their instruments, exchanging uncomfortable glances. Whispers rippled through the crowd. I could feel the weight of 200 pairs of eyes on me, witnessing my humiliation. My father had started moving toward Michael with clenched fists, restrained only by my mother's grip on his arm. Ryan, the best man, stood nearby with his mouth open in shock. My college roommate Lisa had her phone half raised, then thought better of it and tucked it away. All these observations came in a flash as I sat trembling, my wedding dress pooled around me like spilled moonlight on the dance floor. My veil had come partly loose, hanging askew across my face. The bouquet that had been returned to me after the toss lay scattered at my feet, white petals bruised and broken. Through my shock, one thing became crystal clear. I would not remain on the floor. I would not give Eleanor the satisfaction of seeing me broken. With shaking hands, I pushed away Olivia's attempt to help me up. "I've got this," I said quietly, and something in my voice made her step back. I rose slowly, carefully adjusting, my dress, my movements deliberate as I straightened my spine. The room seemed to hold its breath. I removed the veil completely, letting it drop to the floor like a discarded skin. I touched my cheek gently, then looked at my fingers as if expecting blood, though there was none. Michael still hadn't moved, his face a battlefield of conflicting emotions. Anger, confusion, the first hints of regret beginning to surface. Eleanor was tugging at his arm, trying to lead him away before the situation could spiral further out of her control. "Michael," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Look at me." He did, reluctantly, his eyes meeting mine. "Is this who you are?" I asked simply. "Is this the man I married today?" He opened his mouth, then closed it, no words emerging. "What did she tell you?" I pressed, taking a step toward him. "What poison did she whisper that made you believe it was acceptable? To hit your wife of 6 hours?" Eleanor's face hardened. "Don't you dare try to shift the blame," she hissed. "Michael knows exactly what you've done." I ignored her, keeping my focus on Michael. "If you believe I would ever cheat on you or marry you for money, then you never knew me at all." A flash of doubt crossed his face. "The emails," he began. "Show them to me," I challenged. Right now. Show everyone what you think justifies assaulting me on our wedding day." Eleanor stepped between us. "This isn't the time or place for—" "It's exactly the time and place," I interrupted, finding strength in my rising anger. "You've made it. The time and place by orchestrating this public humiliation. So let's be public about all of it." I turned and walked directly to the DJ's table, extending my hand for the microphone. He hesitated, looking between me and the best man, who gave a slight nod. The DJ handed it over, his eyes sympathetic. The weight of the microphone in my hand felt strange, yet empowering. I tapped it twice to ensure it was on, the sound echoing through the silent ballroom. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Eleanor trying frantically to lead Michael away, but he shook her off, watching me with a mixture of dread and confusion. "I apologize for the interruption to our celebration," I began, my voice echoing through the space. "This isn't how I imagined my wedding reception would go. 6 hours ago, I married the man I believed was kind, loving, and trusting. A man who I thought knew me as well as I knew myself." I paused, scanning the sea of uncomfortable faces. Some guests stared at their plates. Others couldn't look away from the unfolding drama. "But it seems I was wrong," I continued. "It appears my husband believes I'm capable of betrayal and deception, based on what his mother claims to have found. Emails between me and an ex-boyfriend, planning to leave Michael after accessing his accounts." Gasps and murmurs spread through the crowd. I saw my parents exchange glances of disbelief. "These emails don't exist," I stated firmly. "I haven't spoken to David in years, except to congratulate him on his own engagement, publicly on Facebook, where anyone can see it was innocuous. What does exist is a pattern of manipulation that I've endured since Michael and I got engaged." I looked directly at Eleanor now, whose face had gone pale. "Would you like me to elaborate, Eleanor? Should I tell everyone about the time you gave me the wrong time for our engagement party, making me arrive an hour late to my own celebration? Or how about when you told Michael's family I was allergic to shellfish, knowing it was my favorite food, so none was served at any family gathering?" Michael's expression shifted from anger to confusion. These were incidents I had mentioned to him before, things he had dismissed as misunderstandings or accidents. "What about the prenuptial agreement you insisted on, claiming it was family tradition, when in fact none of Michael's cousins had signed one? The same prenup that ensures I walk away with nothing if this marriage ends. The prenup that makes your theory about me marrying Michael for money completely illogical." Eleanor stepped forward, her face a mask of outrage. "How dare you speak to me this way, after everything I've done for this wedding, for both of you? You've done nothing but try to sabotage us from the beginning," I interrupted, turning back to the guests. 3 weeks ago, Eleanor offered to help set up my new laptop. Apparently, she used that opportunity to fabricate evidence of an affair that never happened and convince her son I'm a gold digger who never loved him. I turned to Michael, who stood frozen, uncertainty written across his features. "The sad thing is, I did love you, more than anything. But a man who would believe the worst about me without even asking for my side, a man who would hit me in front of everyone we know, that's not a man I can stay married to." My voice cracked on the last words, the first sign of the emotion I was desperately trying to contain. I handed the microphone back to the DJ and walked toward the exit, conscious of every step, refusing to run, despite the almost overwhelming urge to flee. As I reached the double doors of the ballroom, I heard Michael call my name. I paused but didn't turn, waiting. "Emma, wait." I didn't. The emails looked real. I looked back over my shoulder, taking in the scene one last time. The beautiful decorations we had spent months planning, the cake half cut on its table, the confused and horrified guests, Eleanor's face twisted with rage and fear, and Michael, the man I had promised to love forever just hours ago, standing alone in the center of it all. "Goodbye, Michael," I said simply. Then I pushed through the doors and walked away, my footsteps echoing on the marble floor of Hawthorne Manor. Outside, the June evening was mild, stars just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. I took a deep breath of fresh air, feeling like I was surfacing after being underwater. I had no plan, no idea where to go or what to do next. I only knew I couldn't stay. I heard the doors open behind me and turned, expecting Michael, but it was Sarah, Kate, and Olivia, their faces a mixture of concern and protective anger. "We're coming with you," Olivia said, no room for argument in her tone. "Dad's getting the car." As we waited, I looked back at the elegant facade of the venue where my dream wedding had turned into a nightmare. Yet somehow, despite the pain and humiliation, I felt a strange sense of liberation. I had found my voice when it mattered most. The truth had been my weapon, and with it, I had cut myself free. My father's Audi pulled up to the entrance of Hawthorne Manor, headlights illuminating the cobblestone drive where I stood with my bridesmaids. Dad didn't say a word when he saw my reddened cheek, just clenched his jaw and opened the passenger door. The five of us somehow squeezed into the car, me in the front, the girls in the back, and drove away from what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. "Where to?" Dad asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. I hadn't thought that far ahead. The hotel suite Michael and I had booked for the night before flying to our honeymoon in Hawaii the next day was out of the question. "Your house," I decided. My childhood home in Brookline seemed the only safe harbor in a suddenly stormy world. As we drove through the quiet Boston suburbs, my phone exploded with notifications. Texts from concerned guests, missed calls from Michael, and, most surprisingly, a voicemail from Eleanor herself. I switched it to silent and stared out the window, watching familiar neighborhoods blur past. "Do you want to talk about it?" Olivia asked from the back seat. "Not yet," I replied, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. When we arrived home, Mom was waiting at the door. She must have left the reception right after us. She wrapped me in a wordless hug, then led me upstairs to my old bedroom, still preserved from my high school days. Debate team trophies on the bookshelf, Harvard pennant on the wall, photos of friends I'd lost touch with years ago. "I'll run you a bath," she said, squeezing my hand before disappearing into the adjoining bathroom. Left alone, I finally let the tears come. Not quiet, dignified tears, but ugly, racking sobs that seemed torn from the deepest part of me. I cried for the love I thought I had, for the future that had evaporated in an instant, for the public humiliation that would follow me long after the physical pain had faded. When I emerged from the bathroom an hour later, wrapped in my old flannel robe, my sister was sitting on my bed with a mug of chamomile tea and a determined expression. "You should see what's happening online," she said, passing me her phone. A video had already gone viral, shaky footage from a guest's phone showing Michael's slap, my fall, and my subsequent stand at the microphone. Hashtags were trending. Gus wedding from hell and past the Emma story. Strangers were debating what had happened, taking sides, speculating wildly about the emails Eleanor had mentioned. "Turn it off," I said, handing the phone back. "I can't deal with this now." "But you need to..." "No, people are on your side, Em. That speech you gave? You exposed Eleanor completely." I sipped the tea, letting the warm liquid soothe my raw throat. "It doesn't feel like a victory." "Maybe not today," Olivia conceded. "But someday you'll look back and be proud you didn't let her win." The next morning brought clarity along with the sunrise that streamed through my childhood bedroom window. I'd barely slept, my mind replaying the events of the wedding in an endless loop, searching for signs I had missed, red flags I had ignored. My Phone showed 27 missed calls from Michael, 15 from unknown numbers, likely reporters, and dozens of text messages. One stood out, from David, my ex-boyfriend, the very person I'd been accused of having an affair with. Emma, I don't know what's going on, but reporters are calling me asking about emails between us that don't exist. I've got your back. Call if you need anything. That settled it. I got dressed in clothes borrowed from Olivia and went downstairs where my parents sat at the kitchen table, speaking in hushed tones that stopped when I appeared. I need to end this now, I announced, pouring myself coffee from the pot Mom always kept brewing, before it gets worse. Dad looked up from his newspaper. And what exactly? The speculation, the rumors. I need to tell the whole truth, not just what I said at the reception. My parents exchanged glances. Are you sure that's wise? Mom asked gently. Maybe it's better to let things die down. I shook my head. It won't die down, not with that video circulating. And besides, Eleanor's probably already spinning her version of events to anyone who'll listen. As if on cue, my phone rang. Kate, calling. I put her on speaker. You need to see this, she said without preamble. Eleanor gave an interview to the Boston Herald. She's claiming you had a psychological break at the wedding, that you've been unstable for months, and that Michael was just trying to calm you down when someone took the video out of context. My hand tightened around the coffee mug. She's calling me crazy? After what she did? That's not all, Kate continued. She's saying the prenup you signed had a morality clause that you were trying to get around by provoking Michael into violence. She's making it sound like a calculated move on your part. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. A morality clause? The prenup was 20 pages of legalese about financial assets. Does she think I won't show it to a reporter? That gave me an idea. I thanked Kate and hung up, then turned to my parents. I need a lawyer, and then I need a friendly journalist. By noon, I had both. Sierra Matthews from my father's law firm arrived with a digital copy of my prenup, and Marcus Chen, an investigative reporter for the Boston Globe who had covered my father's work with local charities, sat at our dining room table with a recorder. I want to be clear, I told Marcus. I'm not doing this for revenge or for a public battle with the Shaw family. I'm doing this because Eleanor is spreading dangerous lies about mental health and domestic violence. That needs to stop. Marcus nodded, adjusting his glasses. Tell me everything, from the beginning. So I did. I told him about meeting Michael at the charity auction, our whirlwind romance, and the subtle ways Eleanor had tried to undermine our relationship from day one. I shared the coincidences that always seemed to happen around her, the changed dates, the miscommunications, the rumors that would get back to me through mutual friends. I explained how she had volunteered to help set up my new laptop 3 weeks before the wedding, insisting it was a way for us to bond. How Michael had mentioned troubling emails in the days leading up to the wedding, but wouldn't elaborate when I pressed him. May I see your devices? Marcus asked, to verify the lack of these alleged communications. I handed over my phone and laptop. Sierra, the lawyer, supervised as Marcus searched my email accounts, text history, and social media messages. He found exactly what I knew he would, a handful of innocuous exchanges with David from years ago, and a brief congratulatory comment on his engagement announcement 6 months prior. Nothing else. What about the prenuptial agreement? Marcus asked. Sierra pulled up the document on her tablet. Standard asset protection. Nothing unusual for a family of the Shaw's wealth, though perhaps more restrictive than most. Certainly, no morality clause, as Mrs. Shaw claimed in her interview. Marcus took detailed notes, asking occasional questions for clarification. When I finished my account, including the confrontation at the reception, he sat back with a thoughtful expression. This is quite a story, Emma. Are you prepared for the attention it will bring? I nodded. I'm already in the spotlight against my will. At least this way, the truth gets told. What do you hope comes from this? I considered the question carefully. I want people to know what really happened. Not for sympathy or attention, but because Eleanor is using mental health as a weapon, claiming I had some kind of breakdown. That's dangerous and stigmatizing to people who actually struggle with mental illness. Marcus nodded. And Michael, what do you want him to take from this? The question hit me like a physical blow. Despite everything, a part of me still ached for the man I thought I had married. I hope he sees the truth about his mother, not for my sake. It's too late for us, but for his own. No one should be manipulated like that. The article ran 2 days later, not as a sensationalist piece, but as a thoughtful examination of manipulation, gaslighting, and the private suffering that had led to a public breakdown. Marcus had done his research, interviewing other guests who corroborated my account of Eleanor's whispering to Michael just before the slap, and even speaking to former employees of the Shaw family who shared similar experiences of Eleanor's controlling behavior. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My inbox filled with messages of support from friends, acquaintances, and complete strangers who had experienced similar family dynamics. Women wrote to share their own stories of manipulative in-laws and partners. Mental health advocates thanked me for speaking out against Eleanor's attempt to weaponize psychological illness. The truth, once fully spoken, had silenced the rumors. Sometimes, I've learned, the most powerful weapon against darkness is simply turning on the light. The week following the Boston Globe article was a blur of activity and emotion. I alternated between moments of fierce pride in having stood my ground and periods of devastating grief for the relationship I had lost. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by dreams where I relived the moment of betrayal over and over, each time trying to find a different ending. My parents' home became both sanctuary and command center. Olivia had taken a week off from her job at Massachusetts General Hospital to stay with me, screening calls and coordinating with Sierra to handle the legal aspects of my situation. Sarah and Kate visited daily, bringing comfort food and distractions in the form of bad movies and worse jokes. "You have another interview request," Olivia announced one morning, scrolling through my emails on her laptop. "Good Morning America, this time." I shook my head, curling deeper into the window seat that had been my favorite reading spot since childhood. Outside, early July rain streaked the glass, matching my mood. I've said everything I need to say in Marcus's article. Maybe. But think about how many women you could reach on a platform like that. She had a point. The response to the Globe piece had shown me how common my experience was, how many women suffered silently through manipulation and gaslighting from family members who should have supported them. Still, the thought of discussing my pain on national television made my stomach churn. "I'll think about it," I promised, knowing I probably wouldn't do it. Some parts of healing needed to happen in private. My phone buzzed with a text. I expected another message of support from a friend or acquaintance, but the name on the screen made my heart stutter. "Michael. Can we talk? Please, I need to see you." It was the first direct contact since the wedding. I'd heard through mutual friends that he had postponed the honeymoon indefinitely and had taken a leave of absence from his law firm. Ryan had mentioned that Michael wasn't staying at his own apartment or at Eleanor's house, having checked into a hotel somewhere downtown instead. I stared at the message until the screen went dark, unsure how to respond or if I should respond at all. Part of me wanted to hear what he had to say, to understand how he could have believed Eleanor's lies so completely. Another part feared that seeing him would only reopen wounds that had barely begun to close. "Michael texted," I told Olivia, passing her the phone. "He wants to meet." Her expression hardened, Absolutely not. After what he did to you? He's lucky Dad hasn't paid him a visit. I'm not saying I want to see him, I clarified, though even to my own ears the statement lacked conviction. I'm just telling you he reached out. Well, you can tell him to reach right back out through Sierra if he has anything to say to you. Olivia handed the phone back with a determined set to her jaw. I sighed, tucking the phone away without responding. The question of what to do about Michael would wait. There were more pressing matters to handle first. Sierra arrived that afternoon with paperwork for an annulment. Given the circumstances and the brevity of the marriage, this is the cleanest option legally, she explained, spreading documents across the dining room table. We're filing on grounds of fraud, citing Eleanor's deliberate interference and fabrication of evidence. I signed where indicated, each signature feeling like another snip in the threads that had bound me to Michael. When I finished the last page, Sierra gathered the papers with an efficient nod. What about the gifts? I asked. And the venue deposit? The flowers? There's so much to unravel. Don't worry about any of that right now, she advised. The Shaws have more than enough resources to handle it. Focus on yourself. Easier said than done. My mind constantly returned to the details of the wedding, the months of planning, the careful selection of every element, all reduced to a viral video and a tabloid scandal. The dress I had loved hung in my closet at my apartment, a beautiful shell emptied of its promise. My apartment. The thought struck me suddenly. I couldn't stay at my parents' house forever, but the idea of returning to the place I had shared with Michael felt impossible. We had moved in together 6 months before the wedding, combining furniture and dreams in a cozy brownstone in Back Bay. I need to get my things from the apartment, I announced that evening as my family gathered for dinner. I can't keep wearing Olivia's clothes, and I need to figure out where I'm going to live. Dad set down his fork. I'll come with you. We'll all come, Mom added, her tone allowing no argument. The next day, we arrived at the brownstone in a small convoy, my parents' car, Olivia's sedan, and a small moving truck my father had arranged. I held my breath as I turned the key in the lock, half expecting to find Michael inside, despite knowing he'd been staying elsewhere. The apartment was exactly as we'd left it the morning of the wedding. Breakfast dishes still in the sink, garment, bags from the tuxedo rental hanging on the bedroom door, my makeup scattered across the bathroom counter where I'd practiced my look the night before. It felt like walking through a museum exhibit of a life that no longer existed. This is surreal, I murmured, running my fingers along the spines of books we had arranged together on the living room shelves. It was only a week ago, but it feels like another lifetime. Mom squeezed my shoulder. Tell us what to pack. We worked methodically, room by room, clothes in suitcases, personal items in boxes. I left the furniture, most of it had been Michael's anyway, taking only the reading chair my grandmother had given me when I graduated from college, and the collection of framed photos that didn't include Michael or his family. In the bedroom, I found the honeymoon tickets in the nightstand drawer, first-class seats to Maui, hotel reservations at a beachfront resort, excursions carefully planned for each day of what should have been a 2-week paradise. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the envelope, memories washing over me of late-night discussions about where to go, what to see, how to make our first trip as husband and wife perfect. You okay in here? Olivia appeared in the doorway, arms full of sweaters from the closet. I nodded, tucking the tickets back into the drawer. They weren't mine anymore. Nothing in this room was, not really. As we finished loading the last of my possessions into the truck, our neighbor Mrs. Petrovich emerged from the building, curious about the activity. A retired literature professor with a fondness for herbal tea and lengthy conversations, she had often invited Michael and me in for impromptu lessons on Russian poetry. Emma dear, she called, hurrying over with surprising speed for a woman in her 70s. I've been so worried. I saw the news, that terrible video. She clasped my hands in hers, her eyes searching my face with genuine concern. I'm okay, Mrs. Petrovich, I assured her, touched by her worry. Just picking up my things. That woman, she muttered, shaking her head. I always thought there was something strange about her. The way she would come here when Michael was at work, looking through your things. I froze. What do you mean? Looking through my things? Mrs. Petrovich nodded emphatically. 3 times I saw her let herself in when you were both away. I assumed she had permission, being his mother. But it never seemed right to me. A chill ran down my spine. When was this? Oh, let me think. The most recent was about 3 weeks ago, on a Tuesday. I remember because it was my bridge club day and I was running late. 3 weeks ago, right around when the fabricated emails had supposedly been discovered. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Eleanor hadn't found anything while helping with my laptop. She had broken into our apartment and planted the evidence herself. Thank you for telling me this, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. It actually helps explain a lot. Mrs. Petrovich patted my cheek gently. You're better off without them, dear. A man who cannot see the treasure before him doesn't deserve to keep it. Her words stayed with me as we drove away from the brownstone for the last time. My past life packed into boxes, and my future a blank page waiting to be written. I glanced back in the rearview mirror, watching the building recede, until it disappeared around a corner. They say the first step in healing is acknowledging the wound. As I turned away from what had been and toward what would be, I finally allowed myself to fully feel the pain of betrayal, the anger at manipulation, and underneath it all, a small but growing sense of freedom. September brought crisp air and changing leaves to Boston, nature's reminder that transformation was a natural part of life's cycle. 3 months had passed since the wedding day disaster, and I had settled into a new rhythm, a new life that sometimes felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. I had found a small but charming apartment in Cambridge, close enough to my job at the Boston Public Library's rare manuscript department to walk on pleasant days. The space was entirely mine, decorated with warm colors and filled with books, art from local galleries, and plants that required just enough attention to keep me grounded in the present. More housewarming gifts, announced Kate, appearing at my door one Saturday morning with a bag from my favorite bakery and a potted orchid. Though maybe you're fully warmed by now. I laughed, ushering her in. The apartment might be, but I'm still working on myself. It was true. The emotional fallout from the wedding had been complicated and ongoing. My therapist, Dr. Winters, had been instrumental in helping me process not just the public humiliation, but the private grief of losing a relationship I had believed in completely. Some days were easier than others. Kate settled onto my couch, kicking off her shoes and tucking her feet under her. So, how was the date last night? Tom, right? I grimaced, setting coffee mugs on the small table between us. Nice guy, wrong time. I'm not ready. Fair enough, she conceded, taking a sip of coffee. No rush. The pace of healing couldn't be forced, I was learning. Some wounds needed time, space, and gentle care. The viral nature of my experience had added an extra layer of complexity. Strangers still occasionally recognized me on the street, and my social media accounts had gained thousands of followers, many of them women sharing similar stories of family manipulation and betrayal. I had channeled that unexpected platform into something meaningful, starting a blog where I wrote about emotional abuse, gaslighting, and the journey toward recovery. What had begun as personal catharsis had evolved into a community of support. I wasn't a therapist or expert. I made that clear in every post. But there was power in shared experience, in knowing you weren't alone. My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. CNN piece just went live. You seen it? I hadn't. After declining the television interviews, I had been surprised when a CNN producer reached out about a special report on emotional manipulation and family dynamics, inspired partly by my story. I had agreed to a short interview, with the understanding that the piece would focus more broadly on the psychological patterns rather than sensationalizing my specific experience. Want to watch it together? Kate asked when I mentioned the text. I nodded, finding the link on my laptop and connecting it to the TV. The segment was thoughtfully done, featuring commentary from psychologists alongside snippets from my interview. They had used only brief clips from the wedding video, focusing instead on the aftermath and the broader conversation it had sparked. The reporter had also interviewed other women with similar experiences, creating a tapestry of stories that highlighted the insidious nature of this type of abuse. You should be proud, Kate said when it ended. You've turned something awful into something that's helping people. I felt a warmth spread through me. Not happiness exactly, but purpose. It helps me too. Makes it feel less senseless. We were interrupted by another text, this one from an unknown number. I almost ignored it until I saw the preview. Emma, it's Michael. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I just saw the CNN piece and... My heart jumped to my throat. I hadn't spoken to Michael since the wedding day, communicating only through lawyers as we finalized the annulment. The legal process had been completed a month ago, dissolving the marriage as if it had never existed, though the emotional reality was far more complex. It's him, isn't it? Kate asked, reading my expression. You don't have to respond. No, I said, but found myself opening the message anyway. Emma, it's Michael. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I just saw the CNN piece and needed to tell you how sorry I am. Not just for what happened at the wedding, but for everything before, for not seeing what my mother was doing, for not trusting you, for failing you in every way possible. I'm in therapy now, learning a lot about manipulation and codependency. I don't expect your forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that what you're doing is important and brave. You always were the strongest person I knew. I stared at the message, a storm of emotions swirling through me. Anger, sadness, a hint of vindication, and underneath it all, a surprising thread of compassion. Not for what he had done, but for the reality that he too had been Eleanor's victim in many ways. You okay? Kate asked gently. I nodded, putting the phone down without responding. I will be. Later that evening, after Kate had gone home, I found myself thinking about Michael's message and all it represented. The apology didn't erase what had happened, but it was a reminder that healing wasn't just happening for me. It was happening around me, in ripple effects I couldn't always see. I opened my laptop and began to write a new blog post, fingers flying across the keyboard as I explored the complicated nature of forgiveness. Not as an obligation to others, but as a gift to oneself. By the time I finished, dawn was breaking over the Cambridge skyline, painting the sky in gentle pinks and golds. 2 weeks later, I received an unexpected email from a literary agent who had been following my blog. She was interested in discussing the possibility of turning my experiences and insights into a book, not a sensationalist memoir, but a thoughtful exploration of family dynamics, emotional manipulation, and the journey toward healing. The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. Writing had been therapeutic for me, but the thought of expanding it into something more substantial, something that might reach even more people who needed to hear they weren't alone, that was a purpose worth considering. I called Dr. Winters to discuss it during our next session, sitting in the comfortable leather chair in her office that had held me through tears, rage, and gradual steps toward peace. What concerns you about the book idea? She asked after I explained the opportunity. I considered the question carefully. that it would mean continuing to define myself by the worst day of my life, that I'd be stuck in that moment forever. She nodded thoughtfully. And what excites you about it? The chance to help others recognize these patterns before they escalate. The chance to take something destructive and transform it into something constructive. It seems to me, Dr. Winters said, that you've already been doing exactly that with your blog. The question isn't whether you'll be defined by what happened. You've clearly moved beyond that. The question is whether this particular format for continuing your healing work feels right to you. Her reframing shifted something in my perspective. I wasn't the bride who was slapped at her reception anymore. That was something that had happened to me, not who I was. I was Emma Johnson, a woman who had faced betrayal with dignity, who had rebuilt her life piece by piece, who had found purpose in sharing her journey with others who needed to hear it. The following Saturday, I met with a literary agent at a quiet cafe near Harvard Square. Rachel Cohen was warm but direct, outlining her vision for the book while emphasizing that I would maintain creative control over my story. We'd want to expand beyond just your experience, she explained. Interviews with experts, stories from others who've been through similar situations, practical guidance for recognizing manipulation and rebuilding after betrayal. It sounded right. A way to honor what I'd been through without being consumed. Buy it, a chance to create something meaningful from pain. I'm interested, I told her. But I need to be clear about one thing. This isn't a revenge story. It's not about villainizing anyone, even Eleanor. It's about understanding these dynamics and finding a way forward. Rachel smiled. That's exactly why I reached out to you. Your blog never falls into bitterness or sensationalism. That's rare and valuable. As we shook hands to seal our tentative agreement, I felt a sense of possibility unfurling within me. Not just for the book, but for life beyond the shadow of that wedding day. Walking home along the Charles River, I watched sailboats glide across the water, their white sails bright against the blue September sky. A year ago, I couldn't have imagined standing where I was now, couldn't have envisioned the strength I would find in vulnerability, or the purpose I would discover in sharing my truth. The path forward wasn't perfect or certain. There would still be difficult days, moments when the pain felt fresh again, challenges I couldn't yet see. But for the first time since that fateful June afternoon, I felt genuinely hopeful about the future. Not despite what had happened, but because of how I had chosen to respond to it. My phone buzzed with a message from Olivia. Dinner at Mom and Dad's tonight? Sarah and Kate are coming too. I smiled, typing back a quick, wouldn't miss it. The support of those who had stood by me through the darkest moments had been my foundation, allowing me to rebuild on solid ground. As I crossed the bridge toward Cambridge, I paused to watch the river flowing steadily beneath me, constant, yet always changing. Life was like that too, moving us forward even when we felt stuck, carrying us toward new shores even after the storms. I couldn't change what had happened at Hawthorne Manor that June day. I couldn't erase the public humiliation or the private heartbreak. But I could choose what those experiences meant to me and how they shaped the woman I was becoming. And that, I was learning, was the most powerful beginning of all.